Hello everybody, and welcome to the MPW webinar on how to get into medicine. Some of you I see on the bots that you've joined us previously, so thank you very much. For those of you that have just joined one of our webinars, please can we ask that you mute your microphone. There is a chat bot function where if you do have any questions, please do type them in, and we will then answer them at the end of the presentation. So welcome again, and your presentation today will be by Adam Cross, who is the Vice Principal of MPW Birmingham. And so I hand you over to Adam, and I hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I hope you can all hear and see me okay. My name is Adam Cross. Thanks to Betty for doing all of the background work in terms of setting up this webinar. I'm really excited to speak to you all today and share some of my expertise. From teaching students and helping people out, and so it's nice to get back to having some contact with people. Hopefully I can give you an idea of, from my experience, some of the big things that students need to focus on, help them get into medicine. And so I'm going to focus here just on some of the really big key areas that we need to help students with. And so hopefully that means that you can go away and have a little bit of a better idea of some of the things that you should sort of help young people to do. And just to give you a little bit of background about me before we get going. I'm currently sitting in a very sunny little village just outside of Stratford upon Avon. So we've got some beautiful weather here, which always helps. I work at MPW Birmingham, and I'm currently the Vice Principal. I've been with MPW Birmingham for a number of years now, and my role has developed into helping students to gain access onto highly competitive university courses. So I work very, very closely with our medics, our dentists and our vets. And this means I get to see a wide range of students with very, very high aspirations, and I try and get them to get into the courses, these highly competitive courses that they desperately want to get onto. I'm also an author, so I am the current author of Getting Into Medical School, which is a published book by MPW and Crimson Publishing. And I also have authored Getting Into Dental School for a number of years. So we sort of write and refresh these titles on usually an annual basis. So that means that I get a real insight when I'm researching these books, a real insight into how to help students and the things that they need to do. But also, because I work with so many prospective medics, dentists and vets, it also gives me a great insight just on a year-to-year basis as to what the trends and patterns are in the sort of the wider picture out there for all of these courses. Right, so without any further ado, we're going to start by just thinking about a bit of an overview of what I'm going to cover today. I'm basically going to talk you through a typical, albeit condensed, conversation that I would have with a student that was wanting to apply to one of these courses across the course of the year. So this is going to take you through some of the things that we would talk about and some things that we would do and some of the advice that we would give. What I'm not going to talk about that is reflected that you can see on this slide is all of these little individual bits and pieces of individual help that we give. So you can see, for example, stage one of our process at MPW is to assess goals and aspirations. I'm not going to talk to you about that today, but I thought I'd include it on this slide just so you could see that one-to-one individual help. And you can see stage 3, ongoing regular meetings, stage 11, ongoing regular meetings. So what we've got really, the glue that holds all of this advice together is our individual one-to-one work with our students. And that's absolutely vital for helping our students get where they need to be. Whole group work in terms of big groups and giving very generic advice is fantastic, but it does have its limitations. So the foundation of everything we do, it's based all around trying to get one-to-one support for our students. Now, we're very proud of our statistics at MPW Birmingham, and we feel that really is a reflection of the hard work and the effort that we put in. Last academic year, we had 26 vets, medics and dentists placed. So that's a combination of all those three. And given that we're a relatively small college, we had about 100 students apply to university last year. That's for every course, business, economics, absolutely everything. But about 100 applicants, and 26 of those applicants were placed in medicine, dentistry or veterinary science. It's an absolutely massive proportion of our students that are successful in terms of getting onto these highly competitive courses. And we really believe it's because of our forensic preparation of these students for this process. So I'm going to talk you through some of these areas that are shown in our sort of stage-by-stage application process at MPW. And hopefully this can give you an insight into the little hints and tips that students really, really need to pay attention to. We're going to start then with what is really one of the key foundation stones of a successful application. And that's voluntary work and work experience. And this is a question that I have a lot asked of me from students is, what do I need to do? How much experience do I need? How in depth does it need to be? The key advice we give is that you need to start as early as possible as a student with this. So although it can be difficult for sort of under 16s to start to get meaningful work experience, certainly the earlier you can start, the better. And once you hit 16, it tends to get a little bit easier to start to arrange these sorts of placements. But there's no such thing as too soon. We broadly split this experience into work experience and voluntary work. So work experience is referring to medically based placements. So this might be someone shadowing a doctor in a hospital or a GP surgery, or even shadowing a nurse or working in that sort of environment. And this can be very, very small things. So it might be that you just have, you arrange to have an hour-long meeting with a practicing doctor to talk about their experiences. It could be that you go and shadow a doctor, for a week-long placement, or it might be that you're doing, maybe an hour a week for a number of weeks. All of that counts. So that's what we class as work experience, something where a young person is going into an environment, a clinical-based environment, and actually getting a feel for what is going on, no matter how short or long that placement is. With voluntary work, we really talk about anything that a student does that is really unpaid, although in some cases paid work can count here as well. And this is to help people within the community, maybe. Common places to do voluntary work, we have at the lower end of things, students working in things like charity shops or volunteering for just a random charity and just doing some charity work. And as we sort of move on, sort of the more lucrative placements here are where there's sort of voluntary placements, again, in clinical or semi-clinical environments. So for example, I had a student a few years back who went into a local hospital every week and made cups of tea for patients on a geriatric ward, and just sat around making tea and chatting and so on. So it really is a very, very broad spectrum of what counts towards this. Now, just a disclaimer to start with, one of the things that UK universities have come out with in recent weeks as we're under COVID-19 lockdown is that they appreciate that students that are applying next year may have less work experience and voluntary work because of lockdowns happening around the world. So universities will take this into account. So if you have a student who has said, well, I had a lot of things planned for the summer, but because of the lockdown, I haven't been able to do them, then that will be taken into account. But still, there will be people that, have had historical work experience and voluntary work and that they can count on. So absolutely anything that can be done in any situation is going to be valuable. The This can be done at home or abroad. So another very common question that I get is international students saying to me, well, does it have to be in the UK? The answer is no. So relevant work experience and voluntary work can take place anywhere around the world. So this could be in your home country. It could be maybe as a sort of a voluntary expedition that might be undertaken in another country. It could be in the UK. Certainly, I have students that do get placements in the UK, particularly for voluntary work, where they go and get involved in things like care homes and so on. So it can be done anywhere. It all counts. It doesn't have to be UK-centric. However, I would say, again, if we're talking about this idea of what is good, what is better, and what is best, if a student can get some exposure to work experience or voluntary work in the UK, if they're an international student, then that certainly won't harm their application. It'll only be a positive thing, partly just because it will give them an understanding of what the UK system is like. Frequency is really important. So a student that carries out a placement, let's say they do a week-long placement, just all in one go, the summer before they apply, this is fine, it counts, it's relevant. But someone that has done maybe an hour a week for many, many weeks or months, this is better because it shows a long-term commitment to work experience and voluntary work. So if a student can build this long-term, frequent sort of voluntary work and work experience, then this is definitely preferential. It will show that long-term commitment that people are looking for. In terms of the actual sum total amount, and the amount that I'll quote here is in normal times, and obviously we're not in normal times at the moment. But under normal circumstances, most UK medical schools say that they would like to see about a week to 2 weeks work experience. So in that sort of direct sort of clinical setting. With voluntary work, this is something that there really is no minimum requirement, but they do expect that there will be a lot of this done. So really for voluntary work, there's no minimum requirement, they say, but really I would say anyone that is really serious about making a solid application would want to have 6 months worth of sort of frequent voluntary work. So maybe once a week doing voluntary work across a period of at least 6 months. That's really the ideal that we're aiming for. So what sort of placements are best? Like I said earlier, all placements count. Anything that is work experience or voluntary work, it all counts regardless of where it is. So someone carrying out voluntary work in a local charity shop, this counts. It's absolutely fine, but even better would be, let's say, some sort of semi-clinical settings. So the ideal really would be for voluntary work, something like, excuse me, would be something like a nursing home or a care home, or some sort of voluntary placement within a hospital or a school, some sort of setting where you're working with people and potentially vulnerable people. They are the sort of the gold standard really for voluntary work. In terms of work experience, anything that can be done in a hospital. It doesn't have to be with a doctor. It could be with sort of nurses. It could be to do with radiographers. It could be absolutely in any aspect of hospital life, any aspect of community medicine, so general practitioners, family doctors, nurses, even things like speech and language therapists, physiotherapists. It all counts towards getting that overview of what is happening in a clinical setting. So really, if we're looking to advise our young people to give them, the best chances, this is really what we're starting to talk to students about from the end of the sort of the high school, before starting things like A levels and IB study. So students that are applying this year, there's still time to get work experience and voluntary work, but certainly this advice is best given at the beginning of those year 12 studies, so they've got that long-term sort of exposure to these things. Now, in terms of what students need to do when they're actually doing work experience and voluntary work, I've put there as the final bullet point here, keep a journal. This is absolutely vital. So when a student is undertaking work experience or voluntary work, they should keep, it could be an electronic journal, just a note on their phone, or it could be an actual notebook or something. They need to record a couple of things. Number one, they need to record where they've done it. They need to record the dates when they've done it, so exact dates of when they carried out these placements. They need to sort of keep a cumulative total of the number of days that they've done. And they should also keep details of whoever their contact is at the organisation that they've done the experience. And the reason for that is increasingly medical schools are not just asking for a sort of an overall picture of the amount of work experience. They're now commonly asking students to fill out a grid to say what they've done and when. And this is about trying to make sure that students are telling the truth. So it might say this document they will have to fill in. It might say, right, well, tell us the name of the place that you did the placement, how long was it for, and who can we contact to make sure that this was actually a genuine placement. So if they've got all of this kept in a journal, it's going to make their life a whole lot easier when it comes to application. I will occasionally get students coming to me panicking saying, well, I did this experience, but I can't remember who my contact was. I haven't got a contact detail, and that makes it quite difficult. So they need to keep a journal with all of these details. And then once they've got the basic nuts and bolts recorded in their journal, the equally important thing is for them to reflect. So what they should be doing on a daily basis with any placement is to write down their reflections about what they've seen. So this could be initially a list of, I saw this, 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 and this. And it could just be a description of what they've seen. But then more importantly is their reflections. So they might say, well, today I saw a patient go for a pelvis x-ray, for example. And that's fine as a description. But then they need to think about, well, what was the purpose of that? Did they understand what was going on? Did they see anything that particularly stood out to them? So they might say, right, well, I saw this pelvis x-ray and the patient was really, really upset. They were really distraught and they were really in pain. For example, what surprised me here was the role that the doctor played in calming the patient down, and I found that really inspiring, for example. But those reflections are really, really important when it comes to preparing for personal statement writing and for interview. So a reflective journal with details of what's been done is absolutely vital in this situation, and it will make a student's life a whole lot easier. So the next part of our process that we use, and this is a sort of an MPW specific thing that I just wanted to share with you, but this helps our students to prepare for their applications. We run a medical society, we call it MedSoc, and our medical society runs very frequently throughout the course of the year. And it gives us an opportunity for our students to explore wider issues in the world of medicine and get a little bit more exposure just to help with their understanding and the development of their understanding of what's going on in the world of medicine. So if we have a look at, we've got a picture here from one of our MedSoc sessions this year. This is a current junior doctor. His name is Josh, and he works in one of the local hospitals in Birmingham. And we invited him in. He's been doing this for a few years now. Invited him into the college to speak to our prospective medics, to talk about what the life of a junior doctor was. So he is in the last year of being a junior doctor. So he's got really, really busy schedule, but really likes coming in and sort of tutoring the students about what it's actually like to be a doctor. We have other presentations as well throughout the year. So we have other doctors and other healthcare professionals come and visit us just to give the students an idea of what it's like. We also have presentations from students. So we get our students to present to the other students on areas of interest in medicine. And this is an opportunity for them to develop their presentation skills, but also it's an opportunity for them to be doing some wider reading, to really think about what they know about the world of medicine and to broaden their horizons. We also run, as part of MedSoc, interview preparation events. I'll talk to you a little bit later about this in the interview section of the webinar. But we run some really big and impressive events for our students to try and give them as close to sort of real experience of what it's like to have a medical interview. And then we also run trips to local events. We're very lucky in Birmingham to have a large number of top medical schools and Russell Group universities sort of within an hour's radius of us. So we take the opportunity to go to various events. One that we frequent is at the University of Nottingham. It's Chapter on an annual basis. And again, this is a sort of an insight into medical life for students. So we have a big range of these things. What this does, it's just a little bit extra for our students to get them thinking about what it means to be a doctor, what it's really like before they start to develop their application. So the next step for students to do is university research. And again, this is something that would be very, very easy to deprioritize for a student. Students can think often, oh, well, I know about universities. I know what goes on with universities. I'm pretty clued up about different universities. And very often this actually isn't the case. So students like to think that they know a lot about universities, but actually they know very, very little when it comes to UK universities. So we always encourage our students to do some of the following. Now, again, under normal circumstances, we'd be saying go and visit as many open days as you can. Obviously, with things the way they are at this point in time, students are somewhat limited to this, although as the lockdown eases, these open days will come back online. So we'd always say go and visit where you can. Universities, in response to the COVID-19 lockdown, have really started to produce resources for virtual open days and sort of virtual tours around the universities. So visiting university websites is absolutely vital to look to see what a university is like and to look to see what goes on in the life of a university. And then obviously if a student can visit the university for real, then it's well worth doing. In terms of other research, the UCAS website, UCAS, I'm sure you all know, this is the central admissions service for university applications. Their website is absolutely fantastic. And one thing in particular is the UCAS hub that has come online in this past year. The UCAS hub is part of their website where students can sign up to basically keep an electronic record of all of their research. So rather than having to do messy printouts or save web pages sort of separately, the UCAS hub gives a place for students to pull all of this together. It's an absolutely fantastic resource. So if you Google the UCAS hub or visit the UCAS website, it's linked on their front page, then you will see the UCAS hub. You can create an account. You don't need any particular credentials to do that. It gives you an insight of the advice and the information that's available to students. At MPW, we get all of our students using this, and it means that when our students come and meet with us individually on a pastoral level, we can say, right, well, show us your research. So a student might come to me and say, right, well, I'm thinking about being a medic. I'd like to go to university to study medicine. I'll set them some research tasks, and then they'll come back to me and I'll say, right, show me on the UCAS hub. Sign in. What have you found? Which universities are you interested in? What information have you found? And there's also a very nice feature through this where you can actually chat to current students at universities. So if you were interested in studying medicine at Birmingham University, then you can arrange a time to talk to a current medical student at Birmingham University via the chat link. So really, really nice thing there. In terms of other resources, the Complete University Guide is a useful resource. We have to be careful with the ideas of university league tables in this country. There are really three main league tables you'll see for universities and university courses. You'll see the Times university league tables. However, the Times is behind a paywall, so unless you pay for Times access, you won't be able to see it. You've then got the Guardian University Guide, which is free, and then you've got the Complete University Guide, which is also free. These can be useful starting points to figure out what a university is like and what a course is like. But you have to be careful. None of these league tables are government produced. So all of these league tables are produced by commercial organisations. So the Guardian, the Times, for example. So this is not government approved. However, they can give a useful insight into some of the key features of universities and university courses in relation to each other. But just to give you an idea, the Guardian University Guide, which is very, very good, it doesn't actually include a measurement of the quality of teaching in its league tables. So it's more to do with student experience and some resources and facilities and these sorts of things. So you have to just be careful with them, but they can give you a little bit of an insight. Sometimes students will come to me and say, I don't think I'm going to go to this university, University X, because this year in The Guardian, that course is only ranked 20th. With that sort of thing, we have to be really careful. So a student shouldn't make a decision on a university just based on these league tables. It should be used as a holistic judgment of the university and the course with all of the other things going on. In terms of other ways to research, telephone or email, obviously, you can pick up the telephone and call a university. You can drop them an email with any specific queries. And then you can speak to current or former students. Like I said, the UCAS Hub has a really nice feature for doing this. But also, if you get to visit an open day, take the time to speak to the students, talk to the students that are there, and they will give you an idea of what the university is like. The last point on this before we move on is just a word of warning. We sometimes get students that think they can make the decision about which university to go to just by looking at a website or looking at a list of university courses on somewhere like the university and the UCAS website. You have to be really, really careful about this. There are some very, very quirky institutions, higher education institutions in the UK. And I don't mean quirky in a bad way, but if we I'll pick a couple, for example. If you think about the University of Manchester, the University of Manchester is a Russell Group university, has a fantastic global reputation, top 50 ranked sort of global university for a number of courses. It's a great university. So a student might pick that university from their website just because they've got a great reputation. However, the problem in Manchester is that it's got a very unique setup. It's not got a classic sort of campus university setup. So let's say Birmingham University is an enclosed campus, a standalone campus, which gives a very unique university experience. If a student went to Manchester expecting that same experience, they would have a bit of a shock, because right through the middle of Manchester University is a main road heading into central Manchester. And the same with Bristol. Bristol is an extremely interesting setup. It's almost, a lot of buildings at Bristol University are just old historic buildings, historic houses. And so if you haven't actually visited there, it can be a bit of a shock if you just choose it from a website and turn up there and you're expecting a certain thing. So be very, very careful about the nature of universities. And it's really genuine research that will tell you exactly what the university is like, what the setup is like. Is it a very spread out university? Is it all compact? Will you have to travel a long way to get from the accommodation to the lectures? All of these things are things that need to be looked into. So it's not a decision to take lightly, just based on things like league tables. Right, so moving on, next thing to focus on is wider reading. All students from the start of their sort of IB or A-level or equivalent sort of studies, they need to be reading widely about things that are relevant to their area of study. So for medics, they need to read about things that are relevant to medicine. Now, in terms of a UK sort of centred approach here, they will definitely need to keep up with things like the NHS. So understanding what the NHS is, how it works, what the sort of the issues are with the NHS, what the positives are with the NHS. This can be quite challenging for an international student who doesn't really have a feel for what the NHS is. So reading about the NHS, I've put that as top of the list. It's really, really important. Then they can read about new treatments, read about disease, and from I teach biology myself. From a biological perspective, we're in unprecedented times at the moment societally, but biologically, there's so much out there about COVID-19 and keeping on top of all of the epidemiology and the statistics. So there's absolutely no excuse for potential medics to say that they haven't got anything wider to read about. What students should do, like with their work experience, is also keep a journal. So they should keep a journal of what they've read. They could here print out articles as they read them, or just take sort of screenshots, do a screen grab of what they've read. And what this does is, over a long period of time, this builds up their their understanding, their long-term understanding of what's going on in the world of medicine. You can really tell the difference with students of a student who has done long-term reading and one that hasn't. And when it comes to mock interview preparation at MPW, it's it's abundantly clear a student who has just quickly read a newspaper in the last week to try and cobble together an understanding. It's very, very hard to fake a genuine and deep understanding and interest of the world of medicine. So reading on a daily basis is really, really important. Keeping a journal, and then again, that key word of reflect. Students need to reflect. They should start with describing what they've read about, but then they need to analyze and evaluate. So again, along the lines of, I read an article about cancer survival. Let's say I read an article about prostate cancer survival. That's fine, that's one thing. But then say, actually, what impressed me about this, or what shocked me about this, or what particularly stuck in my mind about this was ... That's the really important stuff, because that shows that deeper, sort of higher education sort of level of thinking. I always suggest to my students that they use something like the BBC News website as a gateway website. There are many, many, many more news outlets out there that do a fantastic job of reporting on health news. The BBC is one that obviously every website that you read news on has got bias, but it's relatively low on the political bias, the BBC website. So it'll give a pretty sort of well-informed view of what's going on. If you look at other news outlets, they do tend to have a little bit more of a political slant on it. Now, the reason this is a gateway website is because this is a place to start. So this is a place on a daily basis for a student to read. They should have some sort of news app on their phone that they can, just 10 minutes every day, keep up to date with the health news, health and sort of disease and those sorts of things. And doing this 5-10 minutes on a day-to-day basis will then give them other things to think about that they might want to go on and read about. So if they read something, let's keep with prostate cancer, if they read something about prostate cancer on the BBC website, then that might get them thinking about going and reading up on it in more detail on other websites, on more specialist websites. So BBC website, very, very good to recommend as a gateway to news articles. Right, so what we've got there really in those slides is long-term background preparation that needs to be done by everyone, really from the start of year 12 or equivalent at the latest. We're going to talk about some things then which come into play as we go a little bit more through the process. Now, just to give you a little trail of a webinar I've got later on in the week, this Thursday, the 16th of April, at 12 p.m, I'm also running a webinar about UCAT, BMAT and interview preparation, just to delve in these in a little bit more detail. So you're all welcome to attend that if you'd like to hear a little bit more detail about these. But this afternoon, I would just like to really touch briefly on what UCAT and BMAT are and what the point of pre-admissions tests are. And then we will think a little bit about interviews as well and some of the challenges there. So UCAT is the University Clinical Aptitude Test and BMAT is the Biomedical Admissions Test. UCAT is what used to be called the UK CAT. So you might see some older resources referring to the UK CAT. It's now known as the UCAT, just to clarify that point. What is the point of pre-admissions test? Well, the university system in this country for things like medicine and dentistry got increasingly sort of congested. We're talking 10 years ago or so, to the point where universities were finding it very hard to differentiate between the best candidates. And so on paper, they might have two candidates that were both being predicted 3A grades at A level, got the same GCSEs, same work experience. And they were struggling to know which of these candidates would be better suited to undertake the course. So they devised these two pre-admissions tests to try and help them to distinguish between the best candidates. And what these tests do is focus on core skills in sort of time-pressured situations to give them a picture of who has those underlying clinical skills that will be sort of best trained and best polished at university. With the preparation for these, this again is a long-term process. For someone that's applying to study in sort of, let's say, September 2020, really now is the time to start. So you want to start sort of 6 months in advance, really, the preparation for this. And it's very much a low and slow sort of preparation. It's doing preparation a little bit at a time over a long period of time. So preparation for these is best where you might spend an hour a week to start with. Then do it every week and maybe build it up to more and more hours as you get closer. That's the sort of preparation that really works. It's very, very hard to sort of cram prepare for these. So someone that's saying, oh, well, I'm just going to do 24/7 preparation for these the week before the test, we would need to sort of guide them against that. I've put some links here for you to use. So we've got the top one is the official UCAT website. The second one is the official BMAT website. Just a word of warning again here, there are no authorised third-party resources for UCAT or BMAT. So anyone that picks up a book, buys a book, or pays to subscribe to resources on a website, they are very, very useful, but none of them are directly authorised by the testing organisations. So there are some very, very well-known books that you can get on Amazon that I will sometimes get students come to me and say, well, this type of question I'm really struggling with in this book. We always have to say, just beware of those. They are useful to prepare with, but they are not written by the testing organisation. So they are some third party sort of best guess at what it is. So don't tell people not to get those, but just give them a word of warning. I've also included just a couple of links here to some courses for preparation here. Kaplan are really well known for their preparation courses across the UK. What I really like about the Kaplan resources is that you can have any level of support. You can just get access to their question banks. You can have some actual face-to-face teaching. You can have sort of online sessions. You can have residential sessions. So it's just a really nice resource that someone can tailor to their own needs. But well worth having a look at those. The UCAT website in particular has a fantastic full guide, 100 and odd pages long guide to the UCAT test. Definitely the first port of call. We're going to just have a look at a couple of questions on this then, just to give you an insight into what some of the issues are with UCAT and BMAT, and just to give you a feel for what's going on. So if you have a look at the screen, we've got here a question from the verbal reasoning section, which is the first section on UCAT. And like I say, I'll delve more into these in my webinar on Thursday at 12. Verbal reasoning is the section that people tend to struggle with the most, and that's domestic students as well as international students. So domestic students with English as their first language find this very, very tough. So obviously international students where English isn't their first language, they're going to find this even more tough. What we can see here is that we've got a passage and a question where we have to pick one of the choices that best fits. And what this involves is looking at the different options and then having to track back to look for supporting information in the paragraph. Now, just to, I'm not going to get you to do these, not going to worry too much about these today, but this first one, the answer is A. If you take time to look at this passage of text, you will see that there is not a direct sentence saying that point. So this is not like basic comprehension where you just have to look and find the line that says exactly the same. This is about processing as well. So a student has to process and understand what is going on in the paragraph before they then choose the phrase, the option that best suits. Really, really hard. One of the things that students have to get used to with UCAT and BMAT is ambiguity. In terms of academic studies and in terms of academic exams, there's not an awful lot of ambiguity. You will often know whether something is right or wrong. This is completely opposite to that. Almost everything that you will see, particularly in this verbal section, has sort of ambiguity about it. So students getting used to this idea that there isn't necessarily just one clear-cut answer is really important. The advice that I give for this section for preparation is the long-term reading. So reading and looking at speed reading techniques is really, really important here. But being able to summarize very, very quickly what a passage of text is trying to say is also a skill, and that's helped by reading things like news articles as well. Second section in the BMAT is decision making. And this is to do with like logic problems. So we can see here, it's almost like a logic puzzle where you've got these bits of information about different people and where they're sitting, and then choosing the statement which matches them best. And in this case, A is the answer. We've got quantitative reasoning. This is the math section. This is the one that students like the best and tend to do best on. So this is sort of basic GCSE standard maths, and it's sort of everyday maths. Things like, you know, we've got an example here of renting a motorboat. So it really does tend to be in sort of the real world. It tends to be about table and graph interpretation as well. So really everyday maths being tested there. And part B there is your answer. We've then got abstract reasoning. This is looking for patterns, trends and patterns in shapes. Here we've got, so this question is saying of the test shape, which set does it fit best into? So there are a set of rules that are linking together all the boxes in A, and then a separate set of rules linking together all the boxes in B. What a student has to do here is try and figure out what those rules are, and then apply it to the question to see which test shape fits best. And then we've got situational judgment, and this is where students are given actual real-life examples of usually things to do with medical-based scenarios, although this is a dental-based one. So it doesn't have to be about medical ethics. It can be about dental. It can also just be about general, you know, life ethics. Students are asked to look at a particular route of action and judge either how appropriate it is or how what was the other one? So yeah, appropriateness here. So this is how appropriate is the following response, and we've got 4 to choose from. This is very much about life experience. So this is about where a student would have an understanding of what some of the founding principles are of things like medical ethics, and think about what does it take to be, you know, a decent human being in an everyday situation, to be a nice person, to be supportive and caring and so on, and then try and apply those to these situations. Here, the answer is C. Now, with all of these sections in the UCAT, if you delve a little bit further, you will see the sort of skills that are being tested that a doctor needs. So if we think about quantitative reasoning, for example, we know that doctors are going to have to do calculations. We know they're going to have to do things like drug calculations. So this is trying to test, well, can they do this? Can they do it under pressure? We know that doctors are going to have to read written information and try and withdraw the sort of the key bits of information from that to then inform their decisions about treatment, hence why they're testing that with verbal reasoning. So each of these sections, you can see a rationale for it, for them judging how well suited a student might be to a medical course. Now with BMAT, a little bit different with BMAT. There is some overlap. One of the main differences is that UCAT is not sat in a school or college. So for UCAT, the student has to visit an external test centre to sit the test, and it's done on screen. With BMAT, this is administered by the school or college, actually in the school or college, before being sent off to the testing organisation. And this is a paper-based test. So students won't do this on screen, they will write their answers. Now, the 3 sections here. Section 1 is basically the UCAT skills: problem solving, understanding arguments, reading, data analysis, basic maths, and so on. So really preparation for UCAT largely covers those section 1 skills. Where BMAT comes into its own though is in sections 2 and 3. Section 2 is a test of theory. It's a knowledge test. And this is basically GCSE level biology, chemistry, physics, and maths. And this is a little bit like doing sort of multiple choice GCSE questions on those. Now, where the problem comes with this is that most people that are applying to medicine are doing biology and chemistry, and have good sort of maths GCSE, but physics tends to be the one that trips a lot of people up. So there's no requirement to study physics at A level to be a doctor. Biology and chemistry are the two big ones that you need. So some students can struggle to get their head around the GCSE physics content for that paper. Section 3, though, is the really problematic one. This is writing sort of extended prose, and it's basically writing an essay. And I'm just going to show you this just to give you a glimpse into the difficulty of preparing students for BMAT. And again, getting students to think about the background skills that are absolutely vital. So a student might say, well, what's the point? I don't need to write essays. You know, I don't really need to worry about the quality of my written English. I don't need to worry about my spelling, punctuation and grammar so much. But BMAT tests this directly in section 3. So it's always something worth having at the back of your mind to say to a student, well, okay, you probably haven't got to develop them as much as other people, but if you're going to be sitting the BMAT, then you do need to think about this. So on your screen now is an example of an essay title from paper 3 of BMAT. Now, I'll be honest with you, you know, I find this looks really challenging myself. Thankfully, we don't have 30 minutes now, so I'm not going to get you to do this. But let's just have a look at this. Can you imagine as a student, you know, aged somewhere between 16 and 18, opening a BMAT paper 3 and seeing this? Our belief in any particular natural law cannot have a safer basis than our unsuccessful critical attempts to refute it. Explain what this statement means, argue to the contrary, ... Wow, that's a real challenge. Now, thankfully, this is the hardest one. I found the hardest one as an example here, just to show you what being thrown in the deep end would be like. Students do get a choice of essay titles, and the essay titles are, you know, in different areas. They're not necessarily medically related. There might be some that are related to medical ethic type things, but often they are just more general arguments. This has to be handwritten on one side of A4 exam paper in 30 minutes. It's a real challenge. So students that are struggling with their English, that don't have the best English skills, really needs to be thought about how they can improve those well in advance of applying to study medicine. And then, like I said, well, the other biggest challenge, GCSE content, particularly the physics. Thankfully, on the BMAT website, when you register with them, they give you access to an electronic sort of revision guide for the content. So that is helpful with that. Okay, so we're at the point now where you'd be having all of these things going on in the background. A student would be working on these, you know, over a long period of time. Like I said, with pre-admissions tests, they'd be working on those sort of over the summer period mainly. At the same point then, really by the end of the first year of the 2 years of study, personal statements would start to be introduced. The personal statement is a key part of the UCAS application process. So students have to write approximately one side of A4. So on something like Word, it's about one side of Times New Roman font size 12, normal spaced. It can be no more than 4,000 characters, including spaces, and or 47 lines. So 47 lines, 4,000 characters, including spaces, which is basically just a statement of your suitability for the course. When constructing this, students can really struggle to get going. So they can struggle to find a starting point. Our antidote to that is, again, the reflective journal, the reflective log. So we encourage students, again, to keep a log of any relevant ideas about the things that I'm going to be mentioning in the sections. What we find is that students tend to, if they're pressured, if they're told, right, sit down and write some key ideas down, write down, why do you want to be a doctor? You know, what did you enjoy about your work experience? If they're pressured to do that at one moment in time, they tend to really struggle with it. So having this long-term preparation for this is best. And I don't know about everyone else, but certainly myself, I get some of my best ideas when I wake up in the morning. So I will often wake up in the morning, have an idea, and quickly jot it down on my phone and maybe email it to myself. So I've got a record of it. We'd encourage them to have that similar sort of approach. So they think of an idea, maybe they're traveling home on the train one day, they have an idea, get it down, write it down. And then over a long period of time, of sort of 12 to 18 months, this record of these things actually becomes a fantastic resource to construct their personal statement. In terms of their personal statement, in terms of how they structure it, they need to think about the following sections. We get our students to think about roughly four paragraphs to their personal statement. Firstly, why? Why do they want to be a doctor? Why do they want to study medicine? What is their motivation for doing this? And this is the section that really can't be faked. You can really see when a student has kept a long-term track of why they want to be a doctor. We do on occasion get students come to us and we say, right, well, why do you want to be a doctor? And they say, well, I don't really know. So they need to try and get beyond that as soon as possible. Then the second paragraph is reflection on their work experience and voluntary work. And if they've kept that reflective journal of their work experience and voluntary work in the past, then this should really come together quite easily, this paragraph. Then their academic interests. And again, this is picking up on their the things that they've read about. So what have they particularly enjoyed studying? What wider reading have they done? Do they, is there anything that has particularly interested them? Are there any areas of medicine that they are particularly interested in? All of these things are useful here. And again, hopefully from keeping that journal of what they've read about, this paragraph should largely write itself. It should come together very easily. And then finally, the least important paragraph, but still important, is extracurricular. So what has a student done beyond the classroom that is of interest? So this could be sports, it could be music, it could be hobbies. The only thing we say is avoid really ordinary things. So if you say, well, I really like watching football, I really like playing PlayStation, we'd avoid things, just really simple things like that. But if a student is, I don't know, the world champion at Fortnite, or has, won a trophy for, football participation, then obviously those things are well worth mentioning. Once a student has written a draft, then we like to think of this as personal statement table tennis, personal statement ping pong. So when a student has drafted a personal statement, they then submit it to their MPW pastoral leader, who's known as their personal tutor. And this is a person that they meet with on a weekly basis to talk about any pastoral or academic issues and so on. So the personal tutor will give ongoing feedback and guidance as to what needs to be done to improve the personal statement. So drafts are usually not that good, first drafts. So a personal tutor would then get their hands on it, they would then help the student to develop it, give feedback, and the student would go away and make those changes. And then they would give the personal tutor another copy. And then their personal tutor would make more changes and more suggestions. And round it goes, back and forth, back and forth. For a medical applicant, I'd say on average 8 to 10 personal statement drafts is about right. My record is 25 drafts. So I've had a student 2 years ago where it came back and forth 25 times before it was ready. Again, when I spoke to you at the beginning about minute detail and paying attention to minute detail, it's little things like this that mean we get, last year we had 26 medics, dentists and vets placed at UK universities. Paying attention to the small details is absolutely vital. So that's the starting point for a personal statement, those 4 paragraphs that have built on the reflective logs that we've mentioned previously. Then the last thing I want to talk to you about this morning, again, just in brief at this point, because we'll talk more about it on Thursday, interviews. Once a student has submitted their application with great help from us and great support from us, students will be hopefully invited to interview. You're not guaranteed an interview, but the stronger your application is, the more chance you stand of having at least one interview. There are 2 types of interview that students face, panel and multiple mini interviews, or MMIs as we'll call them. The panel interview is like the picture on the screen. It's that typical apprentice type interview. You go in, there's a panel of people, hopefully they're smiling at you like these friendly people are on the picture, and they will ask you questions as you go through. And you will have this sort of 2-way conversation, and the questions will get asked one after the other by the same people. The panel interview is a dying breed. So there are very few panel interviews left in UK medical schools. And that's because they've been replaced by multiple mini interviews. Now, the multiple mini interview is a completely different proposition in terms of the setup. The types of questions that are asked are usually the same, or there or thereabouts, but you go around and you visit different stations being manned by different people. So a typical interview might be 7 or 8 different stations. So you'd go along to station one person is there, they ask you their one thing or ask you to perform their one task. And once you've finished that, after a couple of minutes, you get up and you go to the next station and you do that task and you go all the way around. So the MMI is this very, very compartmentalized approach to interviewing. How do students prepare for them? Well, the preparation in advance is pretty much the same for the panel or the MMI. Keeping a copy of a personal statement and reflecting on personal statement is absolutely vital. A lot of interviews will look at your personal statement and ask questions about that. So that's really important. There are many, many questions that get asked about work experience and voluntary work. So this is where the journal, that reflective journal again, comes into play. So you can see why we badger students about reflective journals, because they're just so important for all of these steps of preparation. So typical questions here might be, well, during one of your voluntary placements, can you tell me about something that particularly surprised you? Or can you share a shocking experience from your work experience? Or can you, tell me something about your work experience that you thought was a negative of the medical profession? So on and so forth. So they're all reflective questions. There are a number of these questions that tend to get asked. Again, reading widely. Stations and interviewers like to ask about what you know about things. NHS knowledge comes up very, very commonly on these. So very simply, an interviewer might say, well, talk to me about something that you've read about recently in the world of medicine. That's the simplest version of that question, but it can get more and more detailed depending on which interview. Increase your exposure to English for preparation to interview. We're going to talk about that as the last slide, and learn about medical ethics. Medical ethics is a massive part of interviews, and this tends to come in 2 forms. Either 1, being asked to respond to an ethical scenario, or 2, being asked to role play about an ethical scenario. So the student might be asked, again, I'll do a very simple one, not a medically related one, but one that has come up in the past. An interviewer might say, right, well, you have seen your best friend stealing food from a supermarket. What ethical issues does this raise, and how would you go about dealing with those issues? And so a student could be asked then to talk their way through what they would do and what they think. On the other hand, they might say, you might have an actor as part of the station that is pretending to be your friend, and you go in and they say, right, well, you need to confront your friend, you need to discuss this with your friend in this role play situation. So you'll have to actually act it out. So either of those, they both use this core of medical ethics. Now, there's some fantastic medical ethics resources online. The British Medical Association has some fantastic resources. But if you Google medical ethics for beginners, you'll have a very, very good rundown. Lots of resources on the internet about things like, what is the meaning of beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, and so on, which are some of the key pillars of medical ethics. In terms of how we prepare our students for interview, we have lots of mock interview preparation that goes on. And how this works is firstly one-to-one support with a personal tutor. So with my tutees that are preparing for medical interviews, on our one-to-one meetings each week, we will start to run through questions and sort of mock-ups of questions. We will have discussions about some of the things that are likely to get asked, just to start building confidence in those areas. We then have MedSoc sessions about interview preparation, but really the crowning glory of what we do is our full-blown mock interviews. So each year I will do easily 100 to 200 mock interview sessions with students from all around the college. And this goes the same for my senior colleagues as well, where we sit down and a student comes in and they have an actual proper full-on mock interview as if it were the real thing. And then we give feedback and pointers for things to work on. And the thing that we're most proud of is our full mock MMI. So we've run this for the past 2 years, and we do this at least 2 times a year. And what we do is we take over half of the college and we set up a complete multiple mini interview carousel. So we have our staff, so we tend to have 8 or 9 stations, so 8 or 9 of our staff, each one in a separate room with a different question that has previously been used in an actual MMI interview from around the country. And then students work their way around all of these stations. We then provide a comment in writing for each station and a mark. So at the end of this, a student will have had a full-blown mock multiple mini interview. They will know what the experience is like. So when they go, it won't be such a shock. And they will have feedback on each station that they've been at, and they will have an overall mark for each station as well, so they can see what their performance is like. It's a massive undertaking, but it's something that we really pride ourselves on. It's so useful to our students because they take them really seriously. They get really nervous about the mock MMIs and the mock interviews. But then when they come back from an actual interview, they say, well, when I got there, it wasn't that scary because I knew roughly what to expect. Actually, I got so scared about the mock interview that I was having that actually by the time I got there for the real thing, I was a lot more relaxed. So massively important. So wherever possible, in terms of preparation, talking through, practicing questions from former interviews is really important for a student, and that's at the heart of what we do. But we've got some really fantastic things that we do that we offer to our students to help them with their preparation. The last one then, and I've left this till last because this is really the overarching principle for preparation for international student, non-native speakers, so anyone that has English as a second language. All of the things that they do in the application process, they're expected to perform, at the same level as a sort of native speaker. So in terms of the quality of the personal statement, in terms of going to interview and being asked questions, all of these things, they will expect a high grasp of the English language. So what are some of the things that students can do? And this is really obvious stuff, but worth stating. Students need to read widely in English. It's an obvious one. They need to read news articles, they need to read books. I would also suggest watching English TV shows and films, listening to BBC Radio 4, all of these available on the internet. Radio 4, fantastic resource for listening to the sort of the spoken language, and then trying to encourage sort of English speaking to their friends wherever possible. If they can do this over the long term, this will help to mitigate the issues that international students can have when they're faced with things like writing a personal statement or going to interview. It'll be really scary things, but if they put long-term effort into just immersing themselves in the English language, it can really help their chances. Right, thank you very much for listening to me. I'm about on time in terms of my presentation. I've gone maybe a little bit over the allotted time that I had. I'm sure there are lots of questions that you would like to ask, so we have got some time now for questions. So if anybody has questions that they would like to ask, then please.
Thank you, Adam.
And Betty will let me know. No problem, Betty. My voice is struggling after an hour of talking.
Very well done. So we've got a question from Paulina, and she says, are there any universities who don't require UCAT and BMAT?
It's a good question. In terms of the universities which require it, they all need one or the other to be taken. None of them need both to be taken. So you will find that pretty much nearly every medical school needs UCAT, and then a much smaller selection need the BMAT. There are full lists of the universities on the UCAT and BMAT websites, but it's one or the other, but most of them tend to do UCAT.
Okay, thank you. And then Sol has a question. How many MPW students in the medical school prep programme have received offers for medicine? And what is the total number of students who took this programme? So obviously this will be relevant to you for MPW Birmingham.
It varies from year to year. The MedSoc programme is not just for medics, so we get just general scientists involved there as well. So typical MedSoc, we'd probably have 30 to 40 students. Last year, that was about right, that's showing up, but some of those are potential biomedical scientists or potential biologists, and they're really coming along for just the general sort of grounding in terms of the science. In terms of, rough percentages, students that apply, I'd say about 60% end up with one offer or more, as a rule of thumb. So we can't get away from the fact that it is still a very, very competitive field, but certainly our figures for success for interviews and offers is far higher than your average across the country by some stretch.
Great, thank you. Tatiana has asked, are full mock MMIs held only at Birmingham, or does London and Cambridge offer such preparation as well?
As far as I know, I think London and Cambridge have got these in the pipeline for this coming academic year, with the sort of the forerunners on it at Birmingham, but certainly London and Cambridge have sort of taken a leaf out of our book and are trying to replicate that as well.
Okay, thank you. And there is a question which I get asked regularly, really, and it's regarding the A-levels and what subject combinations are best.
Yeah, that's a really good question, really common one. For biology and chemistry, obviously, are top of the list. However, there are some universities that are even flexible with that. Not many, but it's something that we've seen a little bit more flexibility on in recent years. So that's one to look at. But as a general rule of thumb, and in terms of good preparation to make sure a student can access the undergraduate course right from the word go, we would say biology and chemistry definitely need to be done. On top of that then, with A-levels, most schools around the country now do just 3 A-levels across the course of the 2 years. So it gives students just one more course to choose from. Some schools still offer a 4th subject in the 1st year that then is dropped in the 2nd year. So you might have some schools that do 4 in the 1st year and then just finish off 3 in the 2nd year. So 1 or 2 extra subjects is what's needed. There are no hard and fast rules about it. Really, we would encourage sort of academic subjects. So we would say, shying away from things like media studies, sociology is probably a good idea, but there are no hard and fast rules. So if a student did have biology, chemistry and media studies, for example, then it wouldn't be an actual barrier. So there's not an automatic barrier there that says they couldn't apply. They could still apply and they wouldn't be at a sort of significant disadvantage. The only ones that are absolute no's, student critical thinking isn't counted as an A-level for applicants. General studies isn't counted as an A-level for applicants, and further maths as well. And probably the further maths one is the one that potentially could trip up an international student. So further maths doesn't get counted as a separate A-level to maths. But outside of that, it really can be, anything. We would suggest that a student would do something that they're interested in, and something that they feel that they have a good chance of getting a top grade. You'd be better off, let's say, studying history and getting an A-star in A-level history than studying maths and ending up with a B or a C in A-level maths.
Okay, great. Rachel is asking if these requirements are the same for dentistry and veterinary as well.
Yeah, very, very broadly. So with pre-admissions tests for dentistry, it is all UCAT. There's only one dental school that uses the BMAT, and that's Leeds. So from the pre-admissions tests, it's more skewed towards UCAT. For the subject combinations, yeah, biology and chemistry is your foundation, and then another subject other than critical thinking, general studies, and further maths.
Okay, great. Igel has said, I've heard that some students take art as A-level subject, and that medical schools like it because it demonstrates a student's creative potential.
Yeah, it's again, it's one of those things that the word on the grapevine is that, you know, something like art can be very, very useful. Certainly, I would say for dentistry, where there's a need to demonstrate manual dexterity as part of the application process, it can be very, very useful. So to be able to talk about, you know, your manual skills, your dexterity, and your artistic flair, that can be very, very useful. But it doesn't give. It maybe gives a little bit more to talk about on personal statement and interview, but doesn't give a humongous sort of benefit. Doesn't give that applicant a massive boost over others.
Okay, thank you. And one other question that we also get is surrounding international students' applications and the number of applicants medical schools that will accept applicants from overseas. Do you have any idea on that in terms of numbers?
They are, yeah, there is a sort of a number of international places that they have available at different universities, and they are smaller, obviously, than the domestic ones. So it can be more difficult from a numbers perspective with that. What we found, though, is even if a student struggles to get a place one particular year, there then tends to be, you know, very, very good opportunities with reapplying the following year and getting a place with A-level grades in hand. So where we've had some disappointments where a student hasn't been able to gain a place in that first year, and we've encouraged them to reapply, that's been quite lucrative for them as well. But yeah, there is a little bit of a numbers game to play in terms of the fewer spaces available for international compared to domestic.
Okay, thank you. Gemma says, is there any kind of limitation for international students that should take pre-administration before getting into dentistry kind of programs?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Betty, for me?
So Gemma says, I'm guessing the question really is, so is there any kind of limitation for international students that should take pre-administration before getting into dentistry kind of programs? So should they be taking any pre-programs for dentistry, or is the process the same as for medical schools?
So pre-programs as in studying before applying,
Yeah,
or studying before getting into university?
I guess so.
I think that...
Gemma, did you just want to, elaborate on that again, on your actual question, and then we can go on to another question and come back to that one. Yeah?
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Okay, good. Tatiana has asked, actually a very important question we always get asked is, would resits be considered by medical? Yeah,
and it's one of those questions, if I had £1 for every time I had discussed that question, I would have a few more pounds than I do now. It's an ever-changing picture for resits. Resits are accepted into a handful of universities for medicine, dentistry and veterinary science. It changes every year. So a good example this year is that for this cycle, King's College London for dentistry have pretty much said no retakes, but in previous years they were very sort of open and willing to look at retake students. The answer is yes, retake students, it's still very, very possible for a student to make a successful application as a retake student. But they have to have a little bit more flexibility. So if a student as a retake student is saying, well, I've got to go to University X or nothing, then they will probably struggle. If a student says, well, actually, I'm open to ideas on where I study and, you know, the route I go, then yes, there is still a chance. But it's very much about there will be a slimmed down number of options in terms of where you could apply to. Each university has their own policy on it. So we always suggest to students that they contact each university by email with their precise circumstances that have led them to being a retake student, and then the university can give them a sort of a specific answer about their own circumstances. If a student has genuine extenuating circumstances, so let's say before their exams, they had a parent or a close relative that died, or they've had serious medical issues, then that means that they will have a little bit more leeway in terms of applying as a retake student. So a retake student who's just underperformed, not done very well in exams, and wants to then sort of resit and reapply, there are choices, but they are more limited. If a student has genuine mitigating circumstances, they will have a lot more universities open to them.
Great, thank you. And we have a question from Ning. Can international students get a job in the NHS after they graduate?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ever-changing situation. So I can't account for changes in government policy or how things will change in the future. But certainly there are routes into the NHS for international students that have studied in this country and people that have studied around the world. I don't know exact numbers of how many opportunities or placements there are. And like I say, I don't know what the future holds, but yeah, there are definitely opportunities there.
Great, thank you. A question from Angie, and she says, will a student who took a gap year stand a lesser chance of being accepted to a medical school, or are the chances the same?
Great question. That's a really good question. The answer is it depends on what has been done with the gap year. So if someone has used that gap year to let's start at the beginning. Let's say someone has chosen that gap year to do nothing, and they've spent the whole year having sort of leisurely lie-ins, watching films, playing football, doing not a lot else. Then really they're going to stand not a very big chance. If they've used that gap year to develop their work experience and voluntary work profile, then they stand a very, very good chance. So it's not that not everything would have to be completely relevant, but if they've got some relevant stuff going on that has demonstrated their ongoing genuine interest in being a doctor, then yeah, that can be a very good thing to have on a profile. Obviously, that ties hands a little bit with the resit question. So if someone's taken a gap year and they have got the grades that they need, and then they're doing gap year activities and applying, then yeah, they stand a fantastic chance. If they are taking a gap year to resit and improve grades, then it will be the same as I said before about the resits, that they will have fewer options. In terms of gap year activities, it doesn't have to be absolutely wonderful, amazing things. So a lot of students get hung up on going abroad and going on a sort of 6-month medical expedition to some far-flung corner of the earth. It really doesn't need to be that spectacular. It doesn't need to be an expensive thing that incurs lots of costs on a student or their family. As long as they're being engaged in something genuine, they're working hard, they're developing that portfolio of experience, then no, they will stand an equal, if not improved, chance.
Great, thank you. And then Rachel says, is there a minimum age for universities to accept students for medical dentistry and vet programs?
Sorry, Betty, you just cut out there. So is there a minimum age for
universities yet to accept students?
Yes, in most cases there is. So they would, normal age of starting university here is 18. I had a student a couple of years ago. She wasn't a medic, she was a potential lawyer, and she was a year ahead, so she was a year younger, and we had to target universities just carefully with that, and we had to write to a couple of universities. So there are sort of minimum age requirements as guidelines. I think if there was a specific sort of situation, a specific student that you had in mind, it would always be worth contacting the university. But from my experience, yeah, it's sort of normal school age is usually what's required, but there might be a little bit of leeway.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think that is it for our questions, Adam.
Fantastic.
So yes, so thank you very much, and thank you to everybody that has asked the question. Gemma's just come back. Is what I meant is some of the clinical related programs would require DBS. What we'll do, Gemma, is we will take this offline, and I will get back to you once I've spoken to Adam. I will email you back. So thank you everybody for your questions, and thank you for joining the webinar. Adam, over to you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It's been fantastic opportunity. I just wish I was standing in a lecture theatre with all of you in front of me so I could see your faces and carry on chatting. But thank you for being here and taking the time to do this. And thanks to our IT team, we've had an absolutely fantastic experience with using Teams for all of our teaching and all of our contact with our partners. So it's absolutely fantastic, and that's great. So just a reminder then, any of you that are interested, on Thursday the 16th at 12, I've got my UCAT BMAT and interview webinar where we'll delve into those things a little bit more. And then another date for your diary on the 28th of April, our principal at MPW Birmingham, Mark Shingleton, he's doing a Choosing the Right A-Levels webinar. That's at 8 AM. So that's well worth attending if you're interested in just a little bit more detail about subject choices and subject combinations and where the land lies in terms of those things currently.
Great, thank you very much. And we will be sending this recording to all of you that have joined us as well. And please do, if you do have any questions, do email at international@mpw.ac.uk. Thank you, everyone. Please stay healthy, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.